So I'm going back now to our special guest, all the way from Sydney, Australia, James Morcan. And James, where do we go from this show? We have a whole hour, and I don't know if
Okay.
we should focus on one thing. I was going to ask you a question that popped in my mind while we were on break. Is that when you have your podcast now up and going, and you're
hmm
connecting, what are some of the most fascinating subjects that you've been introduced to by some of these guests you've had, the areas that you hadn't even thought about before?
Well, the last episode was a Canadian physicist who studied. He's I actually thought when I began the podcast, I thought I would get into more anti-gravity technologies and things like Area 51, but actually he's very non-conspiracy orientated, which was fascinating because he's talking about alternatives to NASA technology, but all from but he's referencing constantly through on the podcast, and if you go on his site, it's the same. He's referencing real experiments that occurred that shows that we could have alternatives to rocket propulsion. And he studied the works of what I deem to be the great scientist of the 20th century, albeit underreported, was Nikola Tesla, who's
Right.
now getting more attention around the world. And he mentioned there about Tesla's experiments he did in the early 20th century and even late 19th century, especially in an area called Wardenclyffe in Long Island, New York. And that was financed by J.P. Morgan and Westinghouse and financial elites from that era. And it's basically on the record that Tesla created a wireless system back then and something very similar, not quite, but very similar to free energy. And now that's something that, like some of the other things we're talking about here, that you can see, like I was talking to you off the air before about, there is a financial incentive to, maybe the health industry is sometimes a sickness industry, and that there is a financial incentive to maybe not release certain cures, that particularly if they're not patentable. So the big pharma can't control that. Now, I don't get into I think there's a lot of good stuff in the medical field, and there's a good stuff in pharmacy. I'm not anti-pharmaceutical per se, but that's an analogy in a similar way to energy and electricity, where maybe there are other forms, but they wouldn't be able to be once it would be released. Like for example, with Tesla's system, this physicist talked about you would just need a small tower in your backyard or on your roof, similar to a satellite dish. Okay, and then once you've bought that, then you've got free energy, and it's coming from the earth. And then he talked about that this could power and Tesla, and he talked about how Tesla was flying planes around or something like planes. He said you can't really say what they were. He's only seen diagrams, but other farmers in Wardenclyffe, New York, saw Tesla flying these planes around, sometimes multiple planes, and it seemed to be there was no pilots in them, and he's transferring wireless electricity to these planes. Now that's just an example where, to me, it blows my mind because you're hearing a physicist talk about that, and he's not as I say, there was nothing in the podcast he didn't want to get into. He said that maybe the US military are doing classified experiments, but he prefers to stay with the real science. And so it's just amazing what is actually there but not being reported. And it's also, you imagine one of the worst crimes you could commit, along with suppressing healthcare cures. One of the worst crimes you could commit is suppressing free or very, very cheap electricity. Because particularly in third world parts of the world, that's how can I say it? Those people have just got nothing out there, and cheap electricity would revolutionize whole societies. And then on top of that, if you had that, then would we have more time around the world to devote to greater things? Would our society have evolved in different ways in the last 100 years? And just the fact that Nikola Tesla had wireless technology, I mean, when did you first hear about wireless and Wi-Fi and wireless technologies, Dwight?
Yeah, I'll give you an example of what you're talking about, and it's more of a local situation. I live in Nevada,
Hmm.
And Nevada is part, most of the state is the Mojave Desert. And so we get a lot of sunshine. I mean, in the area I live in, we probably have 345 days of sunshine a year.
Yeah.
Maybe even more some years than that. And so solar energy has taken off here big. Right in the area I'm at, there are two very large solar array systems already up, and there's another one going in right now with 980. There's one that's a tower that heats salt or something. I don't know. I don't understand how it all works, but it generates electricity. Now they're building 9 more towers. Well, Nevada Power, it's the company that has all the power, electrical power for Los Angeles, Clark County. They were bought by Warren Buffett a few
Oh,
years
okay.
ago.
Okay.
Now what somehow he's manipulated into the state where people used to, if you put solar panels on your roof, you would get a net credit for the amount of electricity you're producing, and the legislature met and they threw that out, and now there's no incentive, there's no financial incentive to do solar because you're in a sense being penalized. You went out and paid all these thousands of dollars for the panels, and you're not being able to reap the true benefits of it. And it was a huge debate in the state and everything. But
Mm.
needless to say, Warren Buffett won. Now we have that right here because I'm on the other side of a mountain pass from where Las Vegas is. The same thing here with VEA, and there's no incentive to put solar panels in. And so even at the solar panel level, there's a big pushback because
Yeah.
the power companies want to keep their gravy train going. So it isn't hard to to um, grasp that Nikola Tesla, who it is reported that I heard he had some type of system where he could put it into the ground and create electricity. But think
That's
about it.
right.
We've got magnetism. Our own
Yep.
bodies are electrical producers. There's a lot of energy that's just there.
Mm.
And if you can find a way to make it flow, I guess that's all you're really talking about. How do I get the energy from the earth to flow and then we all use it by somehow
Yeah.
microwaving or something? But they don't want that to happen. Can you imagine, James? I don't know what your electrical companies are like there in Sydney and so forth. They would be up in arms. Oh my God, you're going to put us out of business. And I
That's
see
right.
that for all sorts of
Yeah.
different fields. The
Mm.
medical field, the pharmaceutical field. We talked at break about cancer being a $600 billion a year industry in the United States. There's
Yeah.
no incentive to cure cancer, even though they have these cancer institutes. Why would they want to cure cancer and lose a $600 billion a year business? They're just not going to do it. So
Well,
how do we as people force this issue or whatever? I don't know how we could do it.
I
Well,
think my best guess, and the way to work towards solving these issues as a society is we need. It goes back to what we were talking about off air earlier, is that we don't really have capitalism right now. We've got cronyism, and you know how you just said there's no financial incentive to cure cancer or to bring in these technologies, but actually for some little new businessman, a small businessman, there actually would be. So you imagine if you were able to bring that Tesla technology, and let's say you're just a one-man band who sets up a business. Well, there would be massive demand if he was putting these dishes or whatever they may be, mini towers in people's backyard. He could make a profit. So if it was a level playing field, which is what capitalism is supposed to be, where there's no interference from the powers that be, whether it's coming from corrupted politicians who are bought by special interest groups who are putting in certain laws that block things, then if we had the simplest form of capitalism, which I don't even know is possible with all the, we get corrupt governments, we get corrupt administrations year after year. But if we had that, and if we could work towards that, then there is a financial incentive to create for some businessmen. There would be, even though you're going to decimate the bigger players, there would be a financial incentive to deliver alternative cancer cures and things like that, and non-toxic ones maybe, or cheap ones. So I think for me, it all goes back to cronyism, and that there's a desire to, when these global elite get onto a gravy train, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it's oils, whatever. They don't want to let that go, and I think with the oil, the fact that we're still driving petroleum cars. I mean, in the 1890s, in New York City and London, they had electric cars. The taxis were all electric cars, and these were nicknamed hummingbird vehicles because they sounded to the locals like a hummingbird just whizzing by. It wasn't the same as a petroleum engine. And so, that's another thing like Tesla. How could he have had wireless technology a century ago? And how could we have had, what my mind can't fathom is the first electric car was actually invented in 1865. And they had them on the road. And there was parts of the US, I think it was Chicago and New York, where more people had electric cars than they had petrol cars for a brief period, about 10, 15 years. So I can't fathom, we're now we're getting towards 150 years later and not much has progressed. So I think they are slowing things. And the same as you mentioned with solar power, they seem to be, they're talking the rhetoric about investing in these technologies, but they're not really making it easy to do so. And maybe they've worked out a game plan. Okay, in 50 years, we're going to have to switch over, but we're going to make as much money as we can before then and slow it down until the people find. I think that's the bottom line, is the people have to awaken and force these things, because it's not going to happen if we just sit back and do nothing.
Well, it gets taken away from us. And I'll give you an example. Transportation, because you mentioned the electric. There was a public broadcasting, PBS here, which is our public broadcasting system, had a show one time. This was years ago, and it was about the takedown of the electric trolley industry. Right. And all the big cities all across the United States, instead of having diesel-powered or gasoline-powered city transit buses, they had rails going through all the streets, and they had electric line, and all these transit buses were powered by electricity. Mm. And what happened was that, now here's a true conspiracy, a proven one. George Firestone, who owned Firestone Rubber and Tire Company, Rockefeller, who owned the oil company, and the people that had General Motors conspired, and they went to the cities and talked them into buying city buses from General Motors Corporation that would have Firestone tires on them and be patrolled by or powered by the gas and diesel from, in a sense, the oil industry. And all of these cities, all of them, in a sense, buckled under. There was probably bribes involved and everything else. And it ended the electric trolley business. And now we entered the era of the 50s and that, with all these smelly diesel buses and everything, and pollution, spewing fumes in the cities and everything. And yet it was a perfectly good transit system with all the rails laid and everything. That was, there's no noise to it. Electric trolleys, well, you'd hear them clank, clank, clank on the tracks, but not like a big diesel engine bus taking off. And there you go. And there was a movie called "Who Killed Roger Rabbit," and the movie was all based on getting rid of electric trolley cars. Who killed Roger Rabbit? So it's just, you and I, let's just say we were living in Portland, Oregon, or Sydney, where you're at right now. We would have just been brainwashed through publicity and think, oh, the latest and greatest. They're coming out with these beautiful, sleek new buses to get us around town and everything. And we just buy into it, I guess. You just buy into it that, oh, this is the latest, greatest, when it was a step backwards.
Yeah,
it's just a step backwards, and it kept these power companies in business. Now we're seeing it right now with the shale oil and everything. The pushback against alternative energy. There's a huge pushback,
and it's it's not just that it would save us. It could potentially free up people, particularly the Tesla style technologies, but that. if we're addicted to oil, then it seems like a lot of our wars are related to that.
Yes,
And
they
then,
have
you
been.
know, majority of researchers, that's no longer really a conspiracy. Most people believe that one way or another. And so, you know, everything we're talking about here filters into other areas. Do you know what I mean? It affects us on, it increases poverty. More people are unemployed. It's just, everything we're talking about here are really humanitarian issues. Even if listeners hear us talking about technology or, you know, things like UFOs or whatever, I think they all lead to the basic thing, which is what are our leaders doing for the people? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do know what you mean. Let's just take one subject matter. Let's just take energy.
Hmm.
If we had cheap to almost free energy, think how much in your own budget, your own household budget, your production company's budget, and so forth, of well, if you think of money as or resource, as being resources as an energy itself, that would be all freed up for you to put into more oh, you could hire more people that would, you know, even come up with better special effects or, you know, or scenes. I mean, I don't know what your business at all, but you know,
And
any
other people could also get out of the grind. They could start their own businesses.
yeah.
Do you know
So
what I
with
mean?
all that capital be
Some people
freed
just
up.
need it. Some people just need a chance.
Yes, just think of all the
Mm,
capital that would be freed up.
mm,
That the ordinary person could say, well, I'm not spending now $400 a month on fuel oil to keep me warm in the winter and cool in the summer. I'm not
yeah,
spending, you know, how much more that puts in that person's pocketbook and what that does for the, well, the average person, which is about 7 billion of us now on the planet. And yet
yeah.
we're rewarding just a few elite people have all of this money flowing their way. And because we're tied into old technology that could be replaced. Um, you know, when John Kennedy made the challenge, he's going to go to the moon in 10
Yeah.
years. I mean, we couldn't even get a rocket off the pad. We went to the moon in
Hmm.
10 years. If the government, the researchers, everybody said we're going to have free energy in 10 years,
We could do it.
I bet you we'd
Yeah.
have it in 10 years.
And similar to the Kennedy one, when that shows when we focus our when we unite and focus towards a goal,
Exactly.
I think that's also seen in wartime. The amount of technological advances, and it's sad that it takes a war for us, but the amount of technical advances in World War II between what the Germans were doing, what we were doing, what the Russians were doing as well, was unbelievable. And if we could just have that's what we need. And I think scientists not being funded is another big problem.